right, it is 2 o'clock, and that means we can start, as always, perfectly on time with our webinar. So a warm welcome to the second myAbility webinar in 2025. Today everything will be about shaping inclusive companies, how we can all make a difference wherever we are in the company. In the beginning, I'd like to explain a few things before we really get going with the content by our experts and colleagues. So I'll switch to the next slides. So all our webinars are interpreted into English. And for this, I'll quickly switch into English to explain it for all those who need the interpretation, how to find it. So as I explained in English just now, if you are interested or if you think it's easier for you in English, you can find it by clicking on the More in the menu, and then you choose the interpretation, you pick English, and then you can listen to our interpreters, Josefine and Christina. More comments about accessibility are also that there will be subtitles, which you can also find in the menu if you click the button CC, and sometimes you have to click on more or the button with the 3 points to then see the subtitles. You can either see the running subtitles or the entire transcript. Additionally, this webinar will also be recorded, and afterwards the recording will be made available with both the German and the English audio. It normally takes about a week for us to upload this because we do have to edit it and so on. And then you can also look at this later on. I'd also like to introduce myself. I've already said a few things. My name is Jenny Zeller. I'm a business network manager for myAbility, and I'm very happy to be the person to take you through this webinar today. A quick inclusive introduction. I have long brown hair, I'm wearing red lipstick and a very classic white shirt with a black blazer. I have blue eyes, and I'm really looking forward to this afternoon with all of you and with our experts as well. I'd also quickly like to introduce myAbility for those of you who maybe don't know us yet, or maybe know a part of what we're doing. In total, myAbility is a social business which has the goal to make the society and businesses more inclusive and accessible. We have different ways we do this. For example, we have consulting and strategic coaching. We have trainings and e-learnings on accessibility. We have job postings on our job platform with the talent pool management for disabilities, and also disability recruiting and employer branding. And today in this webinar, the myAbility Economic Forum is also important. It's the largest B2B network in the German-speaking countries in Europe about inclusion and accessibility, and that we are the ones running this webinar. And in Switzerland, we have about 15 members since last year, so we are very happy about this and very curious if any new people would like to join this B2B network. My colleague Vicky is supporting me in the back end, and she will also reply to answers on the chat. So, what is going to happen today? What is on the agenda? You know what the topic is. The first hour will be all about the input by our experts. It will be on the one part about inclusive organizational development as a holistic concept, and then we will look at concrete examples and best practices from 3 different experts from the whole of the German-speaking countries, so from the ÖBB, the Austrian Train Lines, ING Germany and EY Switzerland. There will also be a short interview with the panelists, with these experts, and then afterwards, for the last half hour from 3 to 3:30, there will be the occasion for you to ask your questions as well. Throughout the whole webinar, you can share your thoughts and questions in the Q&A tool. This is a tool on Zoom that you find in the menu bar at the bottom. So I'll try to reply to these questions as best as I can. And my colleagues in the background will also be answering your questions in the Q&A tool. If questions are more complicated, they might ask you to send an email about them as well. So these are our 5 experts that will be here today to talk about this large topic of inclusive organizational development. I'd like to introduce them quickly, but they will also introduce themselves inclusively later. But just to give you an overview, I'm very happy that from ÖBB, the Austrian Train Services, we have Angela Hammer and David Gansrigler-Bloemeke. Both of them are senior specialists in diversity management. We also have Sarah Kurmann, who is the inclusion officer for ING Germany. So we're looking forward to these inputs by our neighbors as well. So we also have an expert from Switzerland. Margit Vunder is responsible for culture, diversity, equity and inclusion at EY Switzerland. So all around the topics. She works at EY Switzerland. And of course we also have a colleague from myAbility, which is Zoe Seitz, who is a disability management consultant. And in a few seconds I will also hand over to her. Because, as you know, for those of you who know the webinar already, we'd also like to hear from all of you. What do you think? So we have a question, a warm-up question to open up everything, which Vicky will be sharing with you now. You have different ways of answering. And on the chat you can find the English version. I will read out the question now. The question is, how strongly involved are you in inclusion efforts and measures of your company, and do you feel like you can make a difference? Not at all. Inclusion is not a part of my tasks yet, and I do not know how to get involved. Second answer, barely. I have a basic awareness of the topic, but I do not have the means to do more, or my work shows little impact. Third answer, partially. I'm part of our inclusion efforts, but it's unclear whether they will actually make a difference. And the last answer, actively involved. I'm actively involved and I'm pushing our team ahead. So go ahead and vote. I'm very excited to see what we will see in terms of the reply. We'll give you some time, although we can already see what the trend is. I'll wait a little longer for a few more seconds for the results, which should be shared with you as well in a moment. One more moment. Okay, so we have a lot of replies already. The last answer has 57%, so is what most of you have replied. And in second place we have the third answer, partially, with 29%. Most of you are actively involved, which we are very happy about. So I'm excited to share experiences here. And with 11 and 2% we have the answers of barely and not at all. So I have basic awareness, or I am not involved yet at all, which of course is great that you are here today to gather your first knowledge and gain ideas, insights on how you could start into this topic. So I can pass over to my colleague Zoe Seitz for her first input and also her thoughts on this question.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Let me just introduce myself really quickly. My name is Zoe Seitz. I've joined myAbility as the disability management consultant a year ago, and that's also my professional background. I'm a business consultant. That's why it's especially important for me to talk about this topic today. Now, to introduce myself inclusively, I have long brown hair, blue eyes, and I also am wearing a classic combo, a black blazer with a baby blue shirt and long silver earrings. Now, based on the question that we have just discussed, I would like to start my presentation right away because it's really motivating to see that we can reach so many things if we actively get involved in the topic of inclusivity. It's also a good sign to see many decision makers, many stakeholders here with us today so that we can gather experiences and also look at different angles of a company all together. Now, I would like to ask, first of all, why is it even important to look at inclusion from an organizational point of view? Maybe if we can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. The thing is, it's not automatically clear for everybody why inclusion should be considered at the organizational level, but I would like to show you on my next slide what roles there are when it comes to inclusion within an organization. As you can see here, there are several roles that can be fulfilled at several levels. So we have external roles that are often interfaces or contact persons for our company. For example, that would be a company doctor, depending on the number of employees. Then you have the Ombudsman for equal treatment, the disability commissioner, or an equal opportunities officer. So these are external experts that communicate and cooperate with internal resources because they have to fulfill regulatory measures. So we have people like the occupational safety officer or expert. We have the disabled persons representative, the representative body for severely disabled employees. But there can also be people who put their resources into play here voluntarily. For example, diversity management representatives or other departments talking about inclusion and diversity, as well as ESG officers and sustainability managers. Now, there are even more people working with those roles that we've just discussed. For example, in Austria, that would be the accessibility officer. This person does not have any resources allocated to them, but the role has to be fulfilled nonetheless when you have a certain number of employees. Same thing goes for the employee resource group. And if you look at this and the German-speaking countries as a whole, these are all roles that are dealing with inclusion in some way or form. But of course, there are many other interfaces like IT, HR, recruiting, marketing, workplace adjustment, training. There are so many ways and industries that can be included here. And the reason why I wanted to show you this network is that inclusion is always a complex topic if you look at it from an organizational perspective. And the reason for that is also that inclusion itself is just a multidimensional topic. For us, inclusion is a goal and a process at the same time. So we want inclusion, but in order to achieve it, we need to be inclusive. Also, another challenge is that inclusion is a collaborative term. So it happens together between all of us and among us. Also, for example, if we develop a product for a client, we need to always consider inclusivity and inclusiveness. If we were all working at an individual level and we would not talk to one another, that would be a different thing, but that's not how a company works. So we have to live inclusiveness and inclusion in our company culture. And now I would like to introduce to you 3 levels at which inclusion should be considered and integrated in our everyday work. So this is the system that I wanted to present to you. It's actually from a systemic approach, and it was usually applied to the university context. But ever since it was introduced, it has been developed and evolved for the organizational field and for companies in general. I would like to start at the bottom here. This might be the one that seems the most approachable level. That's culture, company culture. It's our attitude, it's our values, how we want to interact with one another within a company. One example would be the knowledge and our availability to work together and our willingness also to work together. But just having this culture in place does not mean that inclusion is lived practice. So we need the structure to help us put all of this, to bring all of this to life. So for example, we need some guidelines for accessible documents, for example. But we all know from our own everyday work, a guideline for accessible documents and the willingness to create those documents in an accessible manner does not mean that all of the documents will be sent out in an accessible manner. So in this case, the actual practical application comes into play. So how do we actually bring inclusion to life in our everyday work? And in general, you can say that inclusion works in a sustainable manner if all 3 levels are considered. So not just as a general concept, but each and every measure needs to meet all of the requirements of those 3 levels. There might be some measures that are more specific to one of those levels. For example, training might go more into the culture, might fall more into the culture category, but just in general, we need to make sure that we always consider all 3 levels, because only if they are all intertwined, inclusion can have a sustainable effect. And of course, this was all a lot of theory, but we're now moving on from the theoretical approach to the practical one. First of all, I will invite Angela Hammer and David Gansrigler-Bloemeke. They are both working in diversity management for the Austrian Railway Company, and I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. We'll quickly introduce ourselves. We're here together, both of us in front of one camera. My name is Angela Hammer. I'm a senior specialist of diversity management. I am wearing my hair up and I'm wearing a white shirt. Hi, my name is David Gansrigler-Bloemeke. I'm also a senior specialist of diversity management at ÖBB. I'm a little bit taller than Angela. I have brown hair and I'm wearing a black jumper. And I'd like to talk about the structural anchoring of inclusion at the ÖBB. On these slides, you can see 3 different levels of how we treat the topic of inclusion at ÖBB. First of all, I'd like to talk about the laws that are in the background of this, and then about the strategies and the institutional details. Our foundation is the equal treatment policy. It's also the start of the institutionalization of equal treatment in ÖBB. So that means back then we also created regional equal treatment offices where colleagues can ask them if they have an issue. So this is our foundation. At the same time, building on this, of course, we have the diversity offices of the ÖBB, which we have had since 2012. So then they also received their own department. Then, of course, you also need a strategy and goals to sustainably work on this topic and to make sure we sustainably have equal treatment. So we have strategic goals, for example, increasing the amount of women working for us and also the amount of people with disabilities working for us. So we also have a charter of diversity, which also has an action plan, which Angela will talk a bit more later on. Last but not least, on the third level, institutionally, in 2012, this whole topic received a person with the Equal Treatment Officer who has been doing this job for 13 years, which I think speaks for itself. And she additionally has a specialist on her side, and together they coordinate this topic group-wide. And 2017 we also received a specialist for employees with disabilities, and after that we also created a new department with 11 people, where 2 people are working on programs for employees with disabilities and also coordinate them group-wide. I don't know how well you know the ÖBB, but I would like to add a few facts. We are 47,000 employees internationally. We have a lot of subgroups. You will know us from our train service, but we also have the transportation of goods and infrastructure. So of course for this we need a lot of supporters and also partners in lots of different areas. So here on the right side I've also shown different departments and committees that we have that support us and help us coordinate. So I'd like to start with the diversity platform. That means that we have people in our subgroups who are representatives from the HR area. So they are actually working for us, and part of their working time they use to work on the topic of diversity. Additionally, a first learning that we have is the Diversity Council, which we've had for 2 years, where we have partners in the regions and also representatives of the operational areas, where at ÖBB we have many. So we have lots of like train drivers, bus drivers, and in the past we've always had the problem that management was easy to reach, but it was difficult to reach the operative members of our staff. So that's why for 2 years we've had this network, which helps us to pass on the information that we have. But also in terms of product development, we also have the Diversity Council on our side, and they also give us feedback and help us. So there's a lot of potential still there, but for us it was a big problem to try to reach employees in the operative area. And of course we were also very focused on Vienna because that's where we have our offices. So that's something we will keep building on, and we can talk about this some more later if you like. So we also have the regional equal treatment officers, which we have in our group and in all the federal states, and so they are consultants that anyone can talk to if they have a problem. And there's also the Equal Treatment Committee, who are looking at more difficult cases and also strategic measures about equal treatment. So they can look at any problems that we have, they can analyze specific areas. So last but not least, we are very grateful that we've worked together with myAbility in this case, because we now have the group accessibility platform, which is all about accessibility, which is what we coordinate, the 2 of us. And so we work together with experts on accessible traveling, and we also do a lot of communication, for example, speaking on the train stations in Austria, to get in exchange with other people. David already explained how structurally inclusion is anchored in our group. So I want to talk about more specifically how in practice inclusion and diversity is anchored in our group. We are split into 6 work areas, and group-wide we are making sure we develop certain standards to make sure we have certain services either for the entire group or specifically for some of our subgroups. So of course we have 6 different work packages: networking, qualification, programs for women, diversity and international, and also programs for people with disabilities, which is something I will be having a closer look at. So of course it's an intersectional topic, so it means that the other work packages are also a part of it in terms of networking. If we're having events, we also ask, is it an accessible event, or is it an event about a topic that might be interesting for people with disabilities? Also in terms of qualification, we also look at this from our perspective, and it's relevant to all work packages. So programs for women and programs for people with disabilities are programs that we look at and the 2 of us work for. So we have an action plan on inclusion which we have created together with trust persons, and we try to look at inclusion from all the different perspectives, and we talk to our trust persons and talk to them about how we can deal with these areas and how far are we, what else is there to do. Then we also have the individual consultations, where we also talk to members of management, but also employees with or without disabilities on a range of topics, all about inclusion and disability. Then we also have the topic of site inspections. As David has said, we're a very large group. We have so many different locations, so it's very important to us to also have a look at how are we doing in these different locations in terms of accessibility. So that's a process where we're quite early in the process at the moment, but we're trying really hard to get there step by step. Then we also have awareness initiatives, so internal or external events, and of course we also cooperate with other people, for example, to increase the amount of employees with disabilities. I'd like to give a few more concrete examples. So one example of something that we started last year is our internal campaign, You Are Our Potential. You can see a picture at the bottom left, which is a red picture that says You Are Our Potential. And in the picture you can see one of our colleagues who has a disability as well. So it's a campaign that shows different ÖBB colleagues that have a disability and want to openly communicate this. And it's about making disability more visible, because we realize that we have a lot of colleagues with disabilities who don't want to talk about this openly. So we want to create a work environment and a working culture where the topic of disability is not a taboo and is openly talked about. So that is one of our goals of this internal campaign of You Are Our Potential. And other role models who are taking part in this campaign are all colleagues with disabilities within our group. And what's important about this is also the reporting, so we're also having a look at how the numbers are developing. We were quite happy about that, so that we're even starting a second round of this campaign, because we saw that people are becoming more ready to talk about this topic openly as well. We also have a network for people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, so we try to meet them in the different federal states as well and have these network meetings Austria-wide. We also have Austria-wide awareness trainings for management as well, where we work together with myAbility. Another thing that we have done is 2 new e-learnings, and what was very important to us was to not just talk about inclusion, but to also and talk about it on a theoretical level, but also to make the e-learning itself very accessible. So we, for example, it was also interpreted into sign language, just to make it visible, to make inclusion visible. So some of the outputs that we had when we had the site inspections was that in our location we added braille signage or a better visualization of concrete blocks. These are small steps that increase the accessibility at our locations. Do you want to add something, David? We'll happily also add a link of our webpage so you can look at things. So yeah, this was just a quick insight into what we do with a few examples, and we're looking forward to your questions later on. Thanks a lot. That was a short insight, but it was super informative. I'm really looking forward to the possibility to ask some questions and go deeper into some of the things you said. So now let's move over to Germany, to Sarah Kurmann, who is an inclusion officer at ING Germany. Thank you, Sarah, for being here. I'm really looking forward to your input. Thank you a lot. I'm very happy to be here and to show you all this company. If you don't know it, it used to be called ING DiBa. So we are a bank and we are a bit different than other banks. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sarah Kurmann. I've been an inclusion officer for 4 years. When I applied for this job, I did this because I'm very passionate for this topic. I have blonde hair that's quite long. I'm wearing an olive green dress with some flowers on it. So let's start with the slides. Okay, we saw on one of the other slides with the flower pot what the basis is. So we are a little bit different in terms of our culture. We're not only different, but we have the slogan Miteinanders, which is a play on words on togetherness and different. So we are trying to make diversity more visible. So you can also see a picture of this campaign on the right. It might be a bit provocative as well, because the headline is inclusion is superfluous, but underneath it says if we are living equal opportunities. So what is important to us is that people feel really well. So we call it DIB, which stands for diversity, inclusion and belonging. And belonging is especially important to us, to make sure that everyone feels welcome and everyone feels valued. We don't want someone to pretend someone they're not, but we want everyone to feel at home without having to meet prejudices. Then we also have the topic of structure, and we have a very colorful slide here. Our new visual identity is very colorful, which also matches our company. So we are a Dutch company, so we also have a global ING with whom we are always in exchange about different requirements and policies. But at ING Germany, we are also very active. I am the inclusion officer. I'm part of the HR department. Our diversity officer is in the strategy department, but we work very closely together. Then we have the representatives of people with severe disabilities, and we also work very closely with them as well. So we can drive the topic together, which is very important to me, so that it's not HR against the other departments, but we work together for our employees. And then we also have the enabling network, which is a network of employees, which I will talk about a bit more later on. And then we have quite a large committee, which is the DIB Council, which has really gained traction last year and has changed a lot of things. When I started working here, it was kind of a slow council because it was happening on top of the regular work everyone was doing. But now it actually has a lot of drive and is creating a lot of awareness. Within this council, there are different representatives of the employee networks that we have. We have representatives of all domains of our bank that take the topics from the DIB Council into their domains, or also give us feedback from the domains into the council, and of course the different departments like HR, communications, facility and strategy are also all a part of this. And every member of us does have an executive sponsor on the board, which increases visibility, and the DIB Council itself also has a sponsor on the board. And the last group that's on here is the focus group on inclusion. I just want to say one sentence about this. We have the disability compass with myAbility, which is something we have done, and we didn't have a focus group before, and this was one of the results of the compass, that we now have the focus group. Our networks are very important in terms of diversity, because we know that they work closely to the people and they offer lots of opportunities. So sometimes the topics like cultural diversity are working a lot through the networks, not even directly by us, the HR department, but together with them. So we also have a network on inclusion where we have the enabling network. Our purpose there is to live inclusion, and we work for that. But we also try to critically investigate and dispel prejudices. In this network we meet once a week, so we're very active there. We have posts every single week. And looking at the next slide, you can see lots of different events which we have organized through the network. So the Disability Compass was also a measure by the enabling network, and we try to always celebrate the different days that we have, and to have a very accessible way of including our employees into all these different events where you can gain information. So we've gone to a dialogue museum, we've worked with information tablets, and we also have different events that we go to. So there's a large diversity here in terms of measures as well. But I don't only want to tell you all the things that are growing great, because I do think we're on a very good way, but of course we're facing lots of challenges as well. And I think the largest challenge is the topic of time and the resources in terms of time that we all have. We all are very busy. Lots of us also have several topics that we work on additionally to inclusion. So we are very open, and despite our culture, we do not reach the 5% quota. We're still at 4.75%. And for us, it's not about having to reach the quota, but for us, it's about showing that we don't want people to think they have to hide. What can we do that they feel so at home that they can open up as well? The next topic is also the awareness of management. We have a lot of e-learnings in general in our bank, so now we're trying to talk about the topic of inclusion in events that we already have and not add additional events. We also have the topic of stigma, where we also have a campaign that is similar to the one of ÖBB, where we kind of give a face to the topic of disability So it's similar to what the ÖBB has done. And on a high level of management, we also have someone who has a disability and also is open to talk about it. So that helps us a lot as well. But also we gain a lot from the active networks. That was how to quickly get through inclusion at ING.
Thank you very much for this quick overview, and also thank you very much for talking about the challenge that we sometimes have with mobilizing the resources, especially when it comes to our time, our valuable time. I think this is something that is an issue for a lot of us, and we need to take this into, or bring this into our discussion. And now, last but not least, I would like to go to Switzerland, to Margit Vunder. She's the culture diversity, responsible for culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion for EY. Thank you, Margit. Hello and grüezi, everybody. I'm actually in Switzerland as we speak. My name is Margit Vunder, talking to you from Zurich. I am responsible for culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion for EY in Switzerland. I'm in my mid to late 40s. I'm 1 meter 73 centimeters tall. I'm blonde and I'm wearing a, what would I call it? Maybe salmon blouse? Maybe coral? And I'm really glad to talk to you about one concrete example that shows how we make recruiting inclusive in our organization. So let's go to the only slide that I brought, actually. Okay. Now, what have we done in terms of inclusion? EY is one of the big four, and we work a lot in the field of inclusion. We have been working a lot in that regard for a while. What we have realized is that sensibilization and raising awareness is great, but it's not sustainable if it's not supported by the structures that go along with that. So we have platforms, workshops and awareness sessions. So as I've said, they do have an impact, but it cannot end there. You wouldn't go very far if you only did those measures, if you only implemented those measures. And then sometimes certain things depend on single managers, and they are doing a great job. But this can also mean that we are incoherent and there's some insecurity as well. So they do what they can, but what if they don't get the support from the organizational structures? It's not really clear if it is sustainable, if it can be sustainable. And, well, as you can imagine, it often is not. Now, when it comes to the structural obstacles that we're facing, we are often not getting the support that we need. So sometimes people are just thrown into cold water here. People are just left alone. So we thought about what would make most sense for us. It was a journey, and we realized that we need to put a lot of effort into this internally to raise our disability confidence. So this needs to be at a good level in order to be ready to actually invite people with a disability, to offer them a pleasant experience in our organization. And we need to do this at each and every level of our company. That's why we've introduced two measures. We wanted to introduce some structure and some just normal everyday routine in the field of inclusion. So for all job descriptions, sometimes sorry, I will throw in some English words in my German sentences. I'm not trying to throw you off, but that's how I often talk. So again, we write in every job description that inclusion is an integral part of the culture of EY, and we also ask people to tell us about their experience if they are willing to do so. So we want to make people feel at home in our company. We want to make them feel welcome. We also actively encourage applicants with a disability to apply. And we also offer support as a normal part of our recruitment process. So that's one part. So for example, we said to applicants, we want you here, we want you to feel comfortable, and we want to do everything to include you, to invite you into our company. And then we also have an inclusive interview guide. And the objective here is that we have 2 sets of questions that offer a safe space to talk about any characteristics of diversity. And it's also our guide to actually conduct the interviews. So this makes it easier for everybody during the interview to ask inclusive questions and offer a safe space in the interview process. And then for people who have an invisible disability, it's also encouraging for them to talk about it, even if it might not be visible at the first glance. And also for people who already have told us about their issues, they can be accompanied accordingly through the entire recruitment process. Now, why is it important? What is the added value for us? Of course, once we have a structural change, this will have a lasting impact, and it takes a lot of pressure away from single employees who are trying to do their best here. It reduces the load on the individuals. We also make sure that people understand that this is an integral part of our company culture. We do have an inclusive culture already, but we think the most important added value is that if inclusion is a standard part of our practices, it's not voluntary to deal with this topic. So let's say we have an interview process. I'm the hiring manager. I'm a manager of some kind. I'm looking for a new employee. I will have to go through this interview guide, and I will have to deal with this topic, and this will raise my awareness automatically. So it's kind of a ripple effect in order to raise the awareness in the long run, the awareness for diversity, inclusion in the entire organization. And we think that this is actually a very smart change mechanism and also a very positive change in our culture. Now, what do we do beyond those measures that I've already mentioned? We also work in the field of accessibility and disability, and it has become part of our onboarding program. All new employees will go through the steps of the onboarding process, and one part of that process will be addressing accessibility and also disability. We have a chapter about digital accessibility, one about physical disability. So this just normalizes the topic for everybody in our company. And it's not something that has just become recently important to us. It's already standard for us, and that's what we want to continue. And then we have a very simple process for accessibility and accommodation. So if anybody needs support with assistive technology, for example, or has any questions about any accommodations when it comes to business trips, we have an email address in place, and people can simply contact our support team. You don't need any tools. You don't have to go from one part of the company to another, from one department to another. You can contact them, no questions asked. Well, that's basically what we've done. We're very proud of what we've achieved. And we are sure that we will have an impact with all of the measures that we've already taken, and they will have an effect in the long run. I'm really happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much, Margit. Thank you to all of the expert speakers. I'm really looking forward to discussing these topics with you. I've really taken in a lot of what you've told us, and I can't wait to go into the details. We've also seen some questions coming in, so I'm really happy to discuss your experiences. But I would first of all also like to talk about organizational structure by looking at the bigger picture. How do individuals, how are they involved when it comes to inclusion in the organizational structure as a whole? We've now seen how we can organize inclusion, but sometimes companies are just very complex in their organization, and it's difficult to change a structure from one day to another, but it is feasible, it is doable. We have seen examples for that. Now, how can we all leave this webinar and take some things with us, some concrete steps for our own company? And that's why I would like to show you some factors of success that you can apply in your organization. So I will use the 3 levels that we've been discussing as my basic structure here. So culture, structure, and practical application. Now, the first factor of success is including and getting involved experts in their specific fields. And this approach has to be systematic. As Margit has just said, that's normal, that's standard for them, and that should be our starting point. So the community should be involved in every step of the way. And there are many ways to do so. We have standardized feedback rounds with networks, if they are already in place in your company. But you can also offer them consultations, standardized processes for consultations. If there are no networks in your company as we speak, or there are other factors that maybe prevent the creation of such networks, it might be helpful to just get expert opinions from external specialists, because this will create visibility, but also show the relevance of what you're planning. Otherwise, you might be implementing measures that are not really relevant to the actual community. And then you can come up with your guides, with your guidelines that are backed by the experts. This will make sure that the practical application is actually based on what is needed. It is actually tailor-made for your company with the help of the community. Now let's go to the second factor of success. Thank you very much, by the way, to David, because you have already said it. Diversity needs strategy, and that's our second factor of success. So we need a strategic vision for inclusion. Inclusion might not seem like a concrete term, but we do need to figure out a structured approach to the topic. And very often, you just start with the status quo. You don't know where you're headed if you don't know where you're at the moment. In the Q&A, we had the question, what about preventing discrimination? We feel like we're at the very beginning here. Yes, you might be at the very beginning, but in other fields, in other areas, you might already be further along. So you need to, first of all, gather the information of where you're at, and then you can introduce some milestones that you want to reach one after the other. Let's say you want certain KPIs that you need to reach in a specific period. Or some milestones might be included in our KPI agreements or our own personal goals. For example, if I have an action plan for myself where I say I want to commit to 3 measures for more inclusion, that's great for me, but it's also demanding a commitment from your leadership, from your management. So, as I've said, you need to have a strategic approach in order to be able to steer the entire process, which will show you if it works, if you are headed in the right direction. But it also means that you will see the success. We all know how it feels to just tick off a point on your to-do list. It's not that easy in this area, of course, but it can be motivating to just work through your milestones step by step. And at the cultural level, you also need this motivation to reach your overall goals in the culture as well. So we can see this in our structure, because those milestones will help you prevent feeling overwhelmed. Often this area feels so overwhelming, you don't know where to start. And this can be prevented by splitting it up into concrete steps. This will make everything more sustainable and you will get more commitment from all sides. And as Margit has said, inclusion itself is not enough. It needs to be carried by specific structures, because these structural changes will be making all of what you do sustainable. And now I would like to jump to the third factor of success here, and that's the clear assignment of roles and tasks and the targeted use of resources. We all know that resources are always a big issue when it comes to inclusion. You need to do a lot of, or many of us need to do a lot of those things, even if we are already doing a lot of other tasks and fulfilling a lot of other tasks. So it's often additional work that we have to put in here. But it's important to split the roles clearly and transparently. So one person might be responsible for accessible events. One might be responsible for accessible documents, so that you don't have to start from scratch for each and every event to find out how to make it accessible. So all of that knowledge that is gathered during this process can then be centralized and put at other people's disposal. But again, we would definitely recommend that you have to mobilize the necessary resources. Thank you very much, Sarah, by the way, for mentioning the sponsorship from management, so executive sponsors. Just think of a council or a disability officer or any of those roles. It's great for them to have support from the executive level. And you can actually save a lot of resources at the organizational level if the tasks are clearly split up and assigned. So this is how resources can be seized in the most targeted manner. So again, the structure will make sure that you will have a long-term success, and the added value will also be that you don't have to do everything twice if you have a sustainable approach by gathering all the knowledge and make sure that it is transferred by splitting the roles up clearly. Now I want to summarize all that I've said in 3 points. Let's go to the next slide here. So what I want you to take away from this webinar is, please involve experts in their specific fields. Please come up with a concrete plan with measurable steps and define the roles and resources clearly. Now, I don't want to send you out with this input alone, but you already have heard that we will send out a summary in the form of our newsletter. And in that newsletter, you will also find a worksheet from us where you can find everything that we've discussed today, and you can actually use that as a template for your own company. Maybe if we have a look at it right now really quickly, you will see some more, we'll find some more inputs in that newsletter, but you can take everything that you've heard today and apply it to your own organization. Take it into your next discussion with colleagues, with your management. It's a great first step to reflect on your status quo and on where you want to go in the long run. And we've also inserted some of our own examples here so that it's easier for you to fill out this template. So this is definitely an invitation from our side to look at this material that you will be receiving in order to put everything that you've learned today into practice. Okay, and now I would like to seize the opportunity to get your creative juices flowing, and I would like to ask you, what do you think? What enables you in your day-to-day work to promote the topic of inclusion in the company? Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your attention. I will now be handing this over to Jenny, my colleague, who will lead you to the webinar.
Great. Thank you very much to all of you experts. There were so many inputs about how we are different, how are we together, how we have potential and how we show it, and how we show that we are proud to be dealing with this topic and what our strategies and our thinking behind it are. So while you listeners are also thinking about what your experiences or perspective are, please share them feel free to share them on the chat. I'd like to share how we do it for us. I'll do a quick cut here and say, for those who don't have time for the interactive part, which is the next half hour, we're already very happy that you were here for the input of the experts. Feel free to stick around if you still have the time. Otherwise, as we said, you will receive the recording in German and English afterwards, as well as a report. And there are different ways you can contact us, for example, via forum at myAbility.org, via LinkedIn or Instagram, where we are also with our job platform, and we also have a website where you can find more information about us. And since now it's already 3:02, we'll do a little bit of a mixture between interview and the interactive Q&A, for which I will stop sharing the slides, and instead I would like to ask all the experts to switch on their videos, and then I will already look at some of the questions that we got from the audience. A few of you also had different backgrounds and questions. I would like to ask one of the questions I prepared, because we heard from EY, from ÖBB and from ING all the different best practices, which were great, and every single best practice starts somewhere. So very quickly I'd like to ask you experts at the 3 different companies, how did it start for you? What was the first step you took? The first thing that you did to start into the topic of inclusion, as Zoe said, maybe anchored in the 3 levels. How do we start this? So which one of you would like to answer about your start into the journey of inclusion? Margit, I think you'd like to say something. For us, what happened was that we thought we don't have to do anything about inclusion because it's of no concern to us. So we were focusing a lot on like women and different people with different sexual orientation. But then finally we understood that we didn't know enough about the topic of diversity, and that we learned that it's so important. So we started training ourselves, first of all, because we had no knowledge ourselves. But as soon as you start learning about inclusion, you'll realize how much work there is to do and how beautiful this work can do. and how much you learn about inclusion of everyone with this work. But yeah, a lot of the time, and in Switzerland, a lot of the time the problem is that persons with disability are not integrated, but segregated instead. So at EY, a lot of the time we have the feeling we are strong and perfect, and that is the image that we are showing, but we are not strong and perfect. And that is something that we needed to learn to see, so that was how we started out. Thank you for those insights, and I noticed earlier before that Angela and David also unmuted themselves, so they would also like to say something, so please give us your answer. So for us, I mentioned it earlier, the way it started was when we looked at equal treatment and how to secure it, which is like a basic paradigm in diversity management. So we started with the institutionalization of equal treatment. So we looked at all the different things you can do, and at the different time we had a bit of a bottom-up approach. We looked at different networks and showed the top management how important it is to have disability management. So that's how it started for us around 2010, 2011. So it's been already over 10 years. Yes, very interesting, especially in the transport sector. Last but not least, Sarah. So how did it start for you? Well, I've been working here for 4.5 years, and when I started working here, the topic of people with disability was not as big. There was an inclusion officer before, because there has to be, but there weren't that many things, so I had to fight very hard to even make this topic visible. So I had to add that if you speak of diversity, you also have to include persons with a disability. So this is something that wasn't really looked at, and it was really difficult to fight into that. So I always say we have to do a lot of scratching until the door opens. So we did lots of talking, a lot of communication, so that now finally it has become a standard. So people with disabilities are now an integral part. Many people are interested in this topic, so finally it is a part, but we had to try to find our way into existing structures. Thank you. That's a wonderful image with the scratching at the door. Reminds me of our dogs, who's also does this to get in. So I'd like to talk about something you already mentioned, the topic of networks and how they came about. And one member of the audience also asked, how did the network of enabling, how was it set up? Was it initiated by the employees concerned? So this was a question to ING, but if UI and ÖBB, you also can say to something. So there was this question for ÖBB, which says, how is the network for people with disabilities designed? For example, is access restricted to people with a certificate or diagnosis, or is it open to everyone? So I'd like to ask all of you about your networks. The enabling network was set up by the employees themselves. So I already mentioned that we have some employees that are very involved with this and very committed. So they started this network, and they also put work into making sure that this council actually worked, and they also started the experience network. So our network is for the people with disabilities in our bank, but also their friends and supporters. So it's not only for people with disabilities, but anyone can join this network, because we think that the allies are also very important. So there are no official criteria that you need to fulfill to become a part of the network. Angela, would you like to say something? Yes, it's quite similar for us. Our network for people with disabilities and chronic illnesses were founded with trusted persons that are members of the community. It was very important that it's open for anyone and all employees, because we don't want that you have to you don't have to disclose your ability to be able to become a part of the network. So that was very important to us. So entering the network does not mean disclosing your disability. So but also some people have joined who don't have a disability themselves, but they have friends or family that have a disability, so they want to support this network. So that's also something that we want to enable. At EY we have champions. So, but what is most difficult, I think, to get the ball really running in all of the countries. So we have the regional level, where it is going quite well with the events that they run. There's a large community there, but in Switzerland itself, we have a small community, but I feel like it's kind of difficult. You always have to support it a lot because people are still afraid to carry on and to keep pushing. So yeah, I'm learning a lot, and I'd like to learn more from other people as well. How can we make this network more lively? That's very beautiful. Of course, if I ask one of you specifically a question and you also would like to answer something, feel free to raise your hand or to interrupt someone. But I really liked your answer because it also gave an answer to some of the things that we read on the chat, or some things that you, Angela, said in the beginning about intersectionality, where the topic goes further than one aspect. And Sarah, you also mentioned it. So there are challenges like stigma or about how to start with the whole topic, to not force people to disclose their disability. So in terms of Purple Champions and ERGs, we have the International Day of People with Disabilities coming up, and there's an international initiative that is called Positively Purple. So purple is the color for people with disabilities. And I'd like to add in one of my own questions here. You mentioned, Margit, that in the different countries it's quite different, and you at ÖBB also said we regionally had to organize ourselves. And after all of you are from companies that work in different regions and countries, I'd be interested, what are the differences that you found in the different regions, or the special challenges, or the different successes where you found something was really easy in a certain region? I'd like to ask all of you openly. Well, we'll start. So something that was very, very challenging for us was to get to the smaller locations that we have that are spread all the way throughout Austria, and to reach those colleagues who are driving a bus or are working on a train or are driving trains. So to reach all of these people is very challenging because they might not always be in the same location or be part of a very small location like workshops. It's challenging to reach those people, but that's why 2 years ago we founded the Diversity Council, who make a conscious effort to who are themselves operative employees and are in all the different regions, and we also have the regional representatives. And internationally speaking, same as you, we have the different judicial background. So the system of equal treatment that we have in Austria, we are trying to expand into our international subgroups. So we've also had some trainings on equal treatment, looking especially at EU policies. So step by step, we're trying to make this topic larger and bring it outside of the borders of Austria as well, which is very challenging. And a lot of people don't know that even here 12% of our employees are actually working abroad, so we are quite international after all. I'd like to say something that I'm happy about. As you might know, Switzerland does not really ask anything of companies to employ people with disabilities. So not all companies actually do this. So there are different institutions and organizations that take care of it, but so we don't have like this inclusive labor market and have like conscious laws about this. But this is something that we want, and it is something that is much more the case in the other countries. So we're trying to learn from them, and a great example is our colleagues from the UK and especially Ireland, where they started a project where people with a mental disability can join the company, which we used to think was unimaginable, but actually we found out it worked, and we're learning from their best practices, and it's beautiful to see how they do it. So for us, what is positive is that we can learn from the other countries.
Okay, now let me add my comments here as the last one in the round. We are based in Germany, with our biggest location counting 2,500 employees in Frankfurt. So a lot of things that we do are also based on requirements from Germany and in Frankfurt. A lot of our events, therefore, are taking place online. We often go and offer a lunch and learn format, so people can join us in their breaks, because people often don't find the time otherwise. But a lot of events are therefore directed to Frankfurt. We like to include more people, though. That's something we need to figure out. And then you also need somebody who feels responsible at the executive level, so that the teams are getting involved, the managers are getting involved. And if we didn't have the council or the sponsor from the Enabling Network, I don't know if I'd ever be invited to present my inclusion, my numbers and facts and figures at the management meetings. Thanks to this network, we have a regular exchange in place where we go through all of the facts and figures. How many people with disabilities do we employ? And it's just been very helpful for our visibility. Yeah, it's really important. As you've mentioned, visibility is important, and not every meeting needs a strict agenda. You need to be flexible sometimes. And here I'd like to jump in with another question for you, Sarah, before I talk about what Margit has said. Is there extra compensation for promoting equality and disability within the relevant interest groups and departments? Unfortunately not. We are not compensated for that. We don't get paid more, but sometimes you can do it in your working hours. It really depends on how committed your manager is to that topic, your direct report, but officially there is no financial support. We often call it voluntary work, but you can have a huge impact. You can also organize a lot of events, and the people that are involved are usually very motivated to do so. Thank you very much for this very brief answer. Now, one question was raised in our Q&A tool and also by Margit, and that was learning disabilities. Do you think that people with learning disabilities, or are there people with learning disabilities that work in your companies, and in which roles? And first of all, I would like to ask Zoe, maybe you can give us some input here about this topic. Yes, as you know, I was already excited to talk about this because these are questions that we get asked a lot. And I would like to say that learning disabilities is a huge spectrum. There are a lot of things falling into this category. So we have dyslexia on one hand, that is more commonly known, but it can be very individual for each and every person that is affected. So basically, it's all about thinking with inclusion in mind when you structure your organization so that people with disabilities can be included in the workplace and what their special needs might be. Thank you very much, Zoe, for this little input, this little info box that you have just inserted for us. Now I would like to ask, are there people with learning disabilities working in your companies? And Margit, you were also mentioning this really interesting concept from the UK. And please give us brief answers because we only have 10 minutes left. I would like to share the guide with all of you, and you can find all of the steps in there. That was really brief. That was really brief, as you've said. What is your experience with people affected by learning disabilities? Can you share your experiences here? I will also give you a brief answer. We actually have disability inclusion neurodiversity as our focal point this year, so we are working a lot with these issues. We were talking about mental health, we were talking about autism, ADHD, to just name a few. And the question is always, how openly do people want to discuss that they are affected? We try to definitely create the right environment for people with learning disabilities and neurodiversity working in our company. So for example, our big open offices are not ideal sometimes, but we try to do our best to make it accessible. For us, it's hard to say because we sometimes don't know whether people have certain learning disabilities. I mean, it's also a question of privacy. It's okay that we don't know that. But from our collaboration, if we ask people to take part in our e-learning and we involve people with disabilities, we do hear from them, if they're open to discuss that, what they do, what they are affected by, which disabilities they have. But we cannot really say where people with disabilities work, in which department, because we're not allowed to know as the employer. I think it's great that you've mentioned privacy. This really fits our next question that was asked by our listeners. And this person asked, is there any reason why somebody would not like to disclose their disability to their colleagues? Do you think that you can provide a safer environment for them to be open about it? By the way, most disabilities are invisible, and still you need to provide a space where they don't feel any pressure to share, but they feel comfortable nonetheless. What do you think? What would you say? Why do people not want to disclose, or what leads people to be more willing to disclose? I think sometimes it's a lack of trust. A couple of years ago, if somebody told me that they are neurodiverse, for example, I would have reacted like, well, okay, that explains a lot. Because it was, for me, it had a negative connotation. I'm ashamed right now because I know that those were prejudices. But I also remember when I woke up, so to say, to the issue. But for a long time, there was just this general fear that there might be repercussions if I disclose my disability. So we need to really live and breathe a culture of showing people that it is okay and that it's nothing to be ashamed of. Yes, we definitely agree with that. And also from our campaign, we did some reporting here and we saw that a lot of people contacted our HR contact center, many more people than before. So we can see that the culture is shifting towards it is okay. We don't question your performance or your capacities just because you share the fact that you have a disability, but it's really important to create this culture. And David, I think you can add something to this. Yes, we also have gathered some learnings through our educational measures. A lot of people just don't know a lot of things, even about themselves. Some people have visible disabilities that they're not even aware of. And during our sensitivity trainings and our awareness campaigns, we definitely have seen that coming up. I totally agree with all that you have said, but I personally just think that the word disability has a negative connotation for many people. Nobody wants to have a disability, and some people might not feel comfortable saying that word. Even as children, we might have already used it in a negative manner. But we need to move on from that thought process that disability means negative, because we are all different anyway, and whether being different means having a disability or not does not really matter. I think we definitely have to change that word, and this is a cultural issue, just generally speaking. And then we also need to act according to our culture. Yes, as you've said, we are all diverse, we are all different, we are all colorful, just like your visual identity that you shared before. Well said, everybody. Now, 2 more questions before we end this webinar. One thing has been mentioned a lot, and it's always an important topic. How can we raise awareness among managers, and which initiatives and channels have been most effective in achieving this, to get them involved, to get their commitment? Can you give us some examples that were successful in your companies? David, you are nodding. I think you have to answer first. Well, yeah, that's easy for me. You definitely need commitment. You need to introduce, as we did, mandatory training. We include 1,500 people, so managers of all levels, that regularly get training on this. I don't think it's possible without having those mandatory aspects of it. So they are trained as managers, but also a whole module about inclusive leadership. We definitely have seen that they need to be committed to the topic. We've also seen that managers that already have team members with disabilities in their team that are open about it and that communicate that openly, that this contact makes it much easier. This can help get rid of a lot of prejudices or other stereotypes, and these managers are usually way more open for new measures, for new changes. Of course, every first step is difficult, but the more employees with disabilities there are in a company and the more disclose their disability, the easier it is for the next ones coming in. So somebody just has to make the first step, just like we did with our sensitivity trainings and by raising awareness. Zoe, I think you wanted to jump in here really quickly as well, right? Yes, that's definitely a topic. Raising awareness among managers is definitely something that we are often involved in as consultants, because the jump to that measure needs to be sometimes taken just to give them something that they can actually grasp. They sometimes don't understand what fields we're talking about, what the actual concepts mean. Because if we just say, well, yeah, inclusion sounds great, but it also sounds very difficult. And you need to basically break it down into little portions, little steps that they can take. That's where you usually get their commitment. Sometimes you even get the resources to do so. So this is a great way to raise awareness, because it is easier for them to see it with their logic. Thank you, Zoe. Margit, I think you also had 1 or 2 thoughts to share. Yes, so first of all, a business case can help if they understand how many people are affected and how many of our customers and clients might be affected as well. That opens them up for the whole issue usually. And showing them the relevance by showing them how many people know somebody who has a disability or just how common it is usually makes them more willing to participate. I would say that we work a lot with allies. So we have people in our management that just show that they want to function as allies, because sometimes people only react if they are personally affected, if they have someone with a disability in their family or in their team. But you would, of course, need a more general awareness. Thank you very much for participating in this final round. I will try to just summarize what has been asked in the chat before ending the webinar. So we were talking about trust, we were talking about commitment, and about working together in a community. A best practice was shared in the chat. That was a newsletter to raise awareness among employees in all locations. And one question was about how to prevent discrimination. That's, of course, a very broad topic. I think we would have to do a separate webinar on that. The question was for the ÖBB, the Austrian Railway Company, but if you want a more extensive answer, we can maybe talk about this via email. But getting involved people that are affected, people with disabilities, is definitely key in order to understand what is perceived as discrimination, what is considered discrimination. But again, wow, thank you very much for all of your input. That was all really valuable for all of us. Thank you very much for your expertise, for sharing your knowledge and experiences. And thank you very much for your active participation by asking all of those questions. If you would like to get any additional information, feel free to send us an email. Otherwise, you will get our recorded webinar. And I wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you very much and see you next time. Thank you, everybody.